Jeannie Wiley was separated from any form of socialization and society for the first 13 years of her life. Her intensely abusive father and helpless mother so neglected Wiley that she hadn't learned to speak, and her growth was so stunted that she looked like she was no more than 8 years old. Her life inside a series of abusive institutions was only beginning. Jeannie isn't the feral child's real name. She was given the name to protect her identity once she became a spectacle of scientific research and awe. Jeannie Wiley was born in 1957 to Clark Wiley and his much younger wife Irene Oglesby. Oglesby was a Dust Bowl refugee who had drifted to the Los Angeles area where she met her husband. He was a former assembly line machinist raised in and out of brothels by his mother. This childhood had a profound effect on Clark, as for the rest of his life he'd fixate on the figure of his mother. Clark Wiley never wanted children. He hated the noise and stress they brought along. Nonetheless, the first baby girl did come along, and Wiley left the child in the garage to freeze to death when she wouldn't be quiet. The Wiley's second baby died of a congenital defect, and then came along Jeannie Wiley and her brother John. While her brother also faced their father's abuse, it was nothing compared to Susan's suffering, though he was always a bit off. The death of Clark Wiley's mother by a drunk driver in 1958 seemed to undo him completely. The end to the complicated relationship they shared fanned his cruelty into a bonfire. Clark Wiley decided that his daughter was mentally disabled and that she'd be useless to society. Thus, he banished society from her. No one was allowed to interact with the girl, who was mostly locked in a blacked-out room or in a makeshift cage. He kept her strapped into a toddler toilet as a sort of straitjacket, and she wasn't potty trained. He would hit her with a large plank of wood for any infraction. He'd growl outside her door like a deranged guard dog, instilling a lifelong fear of clawed animals in the girl. Some experts believe SA may have been involved, due to Wiley's later sexually inappropriate behavior, particularly involving older men. Jeannie Wiley's mother was nearly blind, which she later said kept her from interceding on her daughter's behalf. But one day, 14 years after Jeannie Wiley's first introduction to her father's cruelty, her mother did finally muster her courage and leave. In 1970, she stumbled into social services, mistaking it for the office where they'd give aid to the blind. The office workers' antennae were immediately raised when they noticed the young girl acting so strangely, hopping like a bunny instead of walking. An abuse case was immediately opened against both parents, but Clark Wiley would kill himself shortly before trial. He left behind a note which read, "The world will never understand. Wiley became a ward of the state." She knew but a few words when she entered UCLA's Children's Hospital and was dubbed by medical professionals there as the most profoundly damaged child they had ever seen. Wiley's case soon enchanted scientists and physicians who applied for and were rewarded a grant by the National Institute of Mental Health to study her. The team explored the developmental consequence of extreme social isolation for 4 years, from 1971 to 1975. For those 4 years, Jeannie Wiley became the center of these scientists' lives. She wasn't socialized, and her behavior was distasteful, began Susie Curtis, a linguist intimately involved in the feral child study, but she just captivated us with her beauty. But also, for those 4 years, Wiley's case tested the ethics of a relationship between a subject and their researcher. Jeannie Wiley would come to live with many of the team members who observed her, which was not only a huge conflict of interest, but also potentially begat another abusive relationship in her life. For all their contributions to understanding human nature, the Jeannie team was not without its critics. For one thing, each of the scientists on the team accused each other of abusing their position and relationships with Jeannie Wiley. In 1971, language teacher Jean Butler obtained permission to bring Wiley home with her for socialization purposes. Butler was able to contribute some integral insights on Wiley in this environment, including the feral child's fascination with collecting buckets and other containers that stored liquid, a common trait amongst other children who have faced extreme isolation. She also saw that Jeannie Wiley was beginning puberty at this time, a sign that her health was strengthening. The arrangement went along well enough for a time until Butler claimed she caught rubella and would need to quarantine herself and Wiley. their temporary situation turned more permanent. Butler turned away the other physicians on the Genie team, claiming that they were subjecting her to too much scrutiny. She applied for the foster care of Wiley as well. Later, Butler was accused by other members of the team of exploiting Wiley. As such, Jeannie Wiley later went to live with the family of therapist David Rigler, another member of the Genie team. As far as Jeannie Wiley's luck would allow, this seemed to be a good fit for her and a time to develop and discover the world with people who genuinely cared for her well-being. Wiley remained an expert in nonverbal communication and had a way of expressing her thoughts to people even if she couldn't speak to them. Despite the progress she displayed at the Riglers, once the funding ended for the study in 1975, Wiley went to live with her mother for a brief period. In 1979, her mother filed a lawsuit against the hospital and her daughter's individual caregivers, including the scientists on the Genie team, alleging they exploited Wiley for prestige and profit. The suit was settled in 1984, and Wiley's contact with her researchers all but entirely severed. Wiley was eventually placed in a number of foster homes, some of which were also abusive. There, Wiley was beaten for vomiting and regressed greatly. She never regained the progress she had made. Jeannie Wiley's present life is little known. Once her mother took custody, she refused to let her daughter be the subject of any more studies. Like so many people with special needs, she fell through the cracks of proper care. Wiley's mother died in 2003, her brother John in 2011, and her niece Pamela in 2012. Russ Reimer, a journalist, visited Susan Wiley on her 27th birthday, and seeing a large, bumbling woman with a facial expression of cow-like incomprehension. Her eyes focus poorly on the cake. Her dark hair has been hacked off raggedly at the top of her forehead, giving her the aspect of an asylum inmate. Jeannie Wiley's story is not a happy one, as she drifted from one abusive situation to another, and by all accounts was denied and failed by society at every step. But one can hope that wherever she is, she continues to find joy in discovering the still new world around her, and instills in others the fascination and affection that she had for her researchers. The Amityville Ghost Boy. This image was captured inside the Amityville Horror House in 1976. This creepy vintage photo remains one of the most chilling paranormal images of all time, with a gruesome story behind it. It was the middle of the night on November 13, 1974, when 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. killed 6 of his relatives with a .35 caliber rifle while they were asleep. Parents Louise and Ronald DeFeo Sr., siblings 18-year-old Dawn, 13-year-old Allison, 12-year-old Mark, and 9-year-old John Matthew. Afterward, he took a shower, hid his bloody clothing and gun in a pillowcase, and left for work, ditching the evidence in a storm drain along the way. Later that same day, the 23-year-old ran to a local bar in hysterics, screaming that his father, mother, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters had been murdered. A group of DeFeo's friends accompanied him back to his house, where they were all met with a gruesome sight. Every member of the DeFeo family had been fatally shot while sleeping in their beds. The next day, he confessed to the truth. He killed his family, and as his lawyer would later claim, the demonic voices in his head made him do it. However, a look at DeFeo Jr.'s life provides an alternative reading of the events. With an abusive father and passive mother, the boy's troubled childhood led to substance abuse as an adult. He not only lashed out at his father, but once even threatened him with a gun. The parents hoped letting him live at home and with a weekly stipend would help. The chilling story quickly spread, with rumors surfacing across the country that DeFeo was tormented by demons. When another family, George and Kathy Lutz, and their 3 children moved into the home about a year later, they perpetuated the story further, claiming the house was haunted by malevolent spirits. It soon became known as the Amityville Horror House and inspired a number of books and movies, including the 1979 film The Amityville Horror. Captured inside the Amityville Horror House in 1976, this creepy vintage photo remains one of the most chilling paranormal images of all time. After the DeFeo murders, the house's next owner, George Lutz, claimed that the home was haunted and called in famed paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren to help. One night, the automatic camera they'd set up on the 2nd floor caught what appeared to be a ghostly boy staring back. Some believe it is the ghost of young John DeFeo, who was murdered in the house by his brother years earlier, but the Lutzes have been accused of fabricating their stories over the years in order to sell books and land a movie deal. And Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s later claims seem to back this up. According to a 1992 interview with DeFeo, he made up hearing voices on the advice of his lawyer William Weber to make the story sound more attractive for future book and movie contracts. William Weber gave me no choice, DeFeo told the New York Times. He told me I had to do this. He told me there would be a lot of money from book rights and a movie. He would have me out in a couple of years and I would come into all that money. The whole thing was a con, except for the crime. That same year, DeFeo attempted to seek a new trial, this time claiming that the offer of movie money tainted his original trial, and that his 18-year-old sister, Dawn, had been the real culprit responsible for murdering their family. He did admit to killing Dawn, but only after discovering her alleged crimes. At a 1999 parole hearing, DeFeo said, "I loved my family very much." DeFeo spent the rest of his life in prison. He died in March 2021 at age 69. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, let me know by leaving a comment below. Your feedback helps me create more content you'll love. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more updates. See you in the next video.